What happens when Hollywood's biggest star meets morning television's most relentless interrogator? The answer is chaos, drama, and one of the most explosive interviews ever broadcast on live television. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is absolutely wild. The Good Morning America studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Camera operators adjusted their equipment, makeup artists made final touch-ups, and producers scurried around with clipboards and headsets. But there was something different in the air that morning, something tense and electric. George Stephanopoulos sat behind the curved desk, shuffling through his notes with a particular intensity that his crew had learned to recognize over the years. This was his hunting face, the expression he wore when he sensed blood in the water. Brad Pitt arrived precisely on time, as he always did. The Oscar winner looked every bit the movie star in his perfectly tailored Navy suit, his famous smile lighting up the green room as he greeted the production assistants. But those who knew George well noticed the almost predatory gleam in the host's eyes as he watched the monitors showing Pitt's arrival. "Remember," George said to his producer Sarah as she clipped his microphone to his lapel, "I want to get into the real stuff today. No softball questions about his latest movie. The audience deserves substance." Sarah nodded nervously. She had worked with George long enough to know that his version of substance often meant pushing guests to their breaking point. The network executive said to keep it professional, George. This is morning television, not a congressional hearing. George's laugh was cold. Professional doesn't mean boring. Brad Pitt thinks he can waltz in here and charm his way through another puff piece interview. He's got another thing coming. Meanwhile, in the green room, Brad was going over talking points with his publicist, Jennifer. The conversation was light, casual, exactly what you would expect before a routine morning show appearance. They had done this dance hundreds of times before. Talk about the new film, maybe share a funny anecdote from set, deflect any personal questions with practiced Hollywood grace. George can be intense, Jennifer warned, applying a final touch of powder to Brad's face. But it's morning television. How hard can he really go? Brad chuckled, that easy confidence that had made him one of the world's biggest stars shining through. "I've handled worse than a morning show host. Remember that disaster with that British journalist who tried to ambush me about my divorce? This will be a breeze." The stage manager appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Pitt, we're ready for you." As Brad walked onto the set, the studio audience erupted in applause. He waved, flashed that million-dollar smile, and took his seat across from George. The host's greeting was warm enough, all professional smiles and pleasantries. But there was something in his eyes that made Brad's publicist shift uncomfortably in the wings. "We're back in 30 seconds, called the stage manager. George leaned forward slightly, his voice low enough that only Brad could hear. "I hope you're ready for a real conversation today, Brad, not just another promotional fluff piece." Brad's smile never wavered, but his publicist noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. "I'm always ready for a real conversation, George. That's what makes for good television, right?" The red light on the camera flashed on. "Welcome back to Good Morning America. I'm here with Academy Award winner Brad Pitt, whose new film is breaking box office records worldwide." George's television smile was perfect, but those who knew him could detect the shark circling beneath the surface. "Brad, thank you for being here." "Thanks for having me, George. Always a pleasure." Let's start with the obvious question. Your new film deals with themes of redemption and second chances. Given your very public personal struggles over the past few years, how much of yourself did you put into this character? The question hit like a slap. This was supposed to be about the movie, about craft, about the work, not about his personal life. Brad's media training kicked in immediately. Well, I think any actor draws from their life experiences to inform their performances. The character goes through a journey that I think audiences will connect with, regardless of what they know about my personal life. George wasn't satisfied. But surely the parallels are deliberate. A man trying to rebuild his reputation, reconnect with his family, prove that he's changed. That's not just acting, is it? That's autobiography. The studio fell silent, except for the hum of cameras. Even the crew seemed to sense that something was shifting, that this was no longer a typical morning show interview. Brad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think you're reading more into it than necessary, George. It's a fictional story about fictional characters. I'm just the guy bringing it to life." "Come on, Brad." George leaned forward, his voice taking on that prosecutorial tone that had made him famous in political journalism. "Your audience isn't stupid. They can see the connections. The question is whether you have the courage to acknowledge them. Courage. Brad's voice carried a new edge. I have plenty of courage, George. What I don't have is an obligation to turn every interview into a therapy session for your entertainment. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators exchanged glances. The director in the control room was frantically signaling for George to dial it back, but the host was in his element now, the sin of conflict driving him forward. Nobody's asking for therapy. But when you're promoting a film about accountability and growth, isn't it fair to ask whether you've actually learned anything from your own mistakes? Brad's famous composure was beginning to crack. What mistakes are you referring to exactly? George smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. Well, let's start with your marriage. The very public custody battle. The allegations. Do you think you handled all of that with the maturity you're now portraying on screen? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Brad's publicist was making frantic cutting motions from the wings, but George wasn't looking at her. His focus was entirely on his prey. Brad's eyes flashed with something dangerous. The charming movie star facade was beginning to slip, revealing something harder underneath. I think we need to redirect this conversation back to why I'm actually here, George. The film. But George had tasted blood, and there was no backing down now. The film is about a man confronting his past mistakes. So, I'll ask again. Do you think you handled your divorce and custody situation with the maturity you're now portraying? My personal life is not up for discussion on morning television. Brad's voice was steady, but anyone watching could see the storm building behind his eyes. If you want to talk about the craft of acting, the themes of the story, I'm all ears. But we're not doing this. George's smile turned predatory. But Brad, you've built your entire career on your public image. You can't have it both ways. You can't sell tickets based on your celebrity and then claim privacy when things get uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Brad laughed, but there was no humor in it. George, I've been doing interviews longer than some of your staff have been alive. This isn't about comfort. This is about basic professional respect, which you seem to have forgotten. The control room was in chaos. The director was shouting instructions through headsets, but George had removed his earpiece minutes ago. The network executives watching from their offices were frantically making phone calls. This was live television spiraling completely out of control. Professional respect? George's voice rose slightly. Is that what you call refusing to answer legitimate questions about your behavior? About the impact your actions had on your children? That was the line Brad had been dreading George would cross, and now he had. The mention of his children changed everything. Brad's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. You just crossed a line you can't uncross, George. His voice was deadly quiet now. My kids are off limits. Period. Your kids weren't off limits when you made choices that affected them, were they? George pressed, sensing he had found the ultimate pressure point. The custody evaluations, the therapy sessions, the court documents, all of that is public record. Are you saying the public doesn't have a right to understand the man behind the movie star? Brad stood up slowly, his microphone pack falling to the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the studio. The audience gasped. This was uncharted territory for morning television. Sit down, Brad. George's command was sharp, authoritative. We're in the middle of an interview. No, we're not. Brad's voice carried across the entire studio. What we're in the middle of is an ambush. You brought me here under false pretenses to discuss my work, and instead you've decided to play amateur psychologist on live television. George remained seated, his composure perfect despite the chaos erupting around him. I brought you here to have an honest conversation, something your publicists and handlers clearly haven't prepared you for. Honest? Brad's laugh was bitter. There's nothing honest about this. This is sensationalism, disguised as journalism. This is you trying to make a name for yourself by tearing down someone else. The studio audience was dead silent now, transfixed by the unfolding drama. Camera operators continued filming, unsure whether they should stop. The stage manager was approaching cautiously, clearly out of his depth. I've already made my name, Brad. George's voice was ice cold. I've interviewed presidents, prime ministers, world leaders. I don't need to tear anyone down. But I also don't coddle celebrities who think their fame makes them untouchable. Untouchable? Brad's voice rose for the first time. You think this is about being untouchable? This is about basic human decency, about understanding that there are lines you don't cross, especially when children are involved. George finally stood, matching Brad's energy. Your children are involved because you involved them, Every choice you made, every headline you generated, every court filing affected them. Don't blame me for asking the questions everyone else is thinking. Everyone else? Brad's anger was building to a crescendo. You mean your producers? Your network executives counting ratings points while you exploit my family for entertainment? Those are the people whose thoughts you're worried about? The confrontation had evolved beyond a mere interview dispute. This was now a philosophical battle about the nature of celebrity, privacy, and the media's role in dissecting public figures. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of this unprecedented television moment. I'm worried about delivering honest journalism to our viewers. George's voice never wavered. They deserve better than carefully scripted promotional appearances. They deserve to understand who you really are beneath the Hollywood polish. Who I really am. Brad's composure finally shattered completely. Who I really am is a father trying to protect his children from exactly this kind of media circus. Who I really am is someone who came here in good faith to discuss my work and instead walked into a character assassination disguised as an interview. George sensed his moment. Character assassination or character examination? There's a difference, Brad, and the fact that you can't tell which one this is says everything about where you are mentally right now. The psychological warfare was complete. George had not only attacked Brad's public image and personal life, but was now questioning his mental state on live television. It was a masterclass in aggressive interviewing tactics, even if it was completely inappropriate for the setting. Brad's publicist had given up trying to signal from the wings and was now speaking urgently into her phone, likely with lawyers or network executives. The stage manager had retreated, clearly having received instructions to let this play out rather than create an even bigger scene by interfering. You want to examine my character? Brad's voice was quiet again, but it carried a menace that made everyone in the studio nervous. Let's examine yours, George. What kind of character ambushes a guest? What kind of character uses someone's children as ammunition in a television interview? What kind of character hides behind the banner of journalism while engaging in nothing more than sophisticated bullying? For the first time in the interview, George looked slightly uncertain. He had expected Brad to crumble, to either storm off or break down. Instead, the actor was fighting back with an intelligence and intensity that George hadn't anticipated. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked, George replied, but his voice lacked some of its earlier conviction. No, Brad said firmly. You're asking the questions that will generate the most controversy, the most headlines, the most social media buzz. There's a difference between journalism and exploitation, and you've crossed that line so far you can't even see it anymore. The studio had become a pressure cooker, and everyone could feel that something was about to explode. The explosion came in the form of George's next words, delivered with surgical precision. You talk about exploitation, Brad, but isn't that exactly what you did to your own family? Exploited them for your image, your career, your ego? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Brad's face went white, then flushed red with rage. The careful media training, the years of Hollywood diplomacy, the practiced charm, all of it evaporated in an instant. How dare you? The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but they carried more menace than if he had shouted. How dare you sit there and lecture me about my family? George sensed victory and pressed harder. I'm not lecturing. I'm asking you to take accountability. Your ex-wife, your children, they've all paid the price for your choices. When do you start owning that instead of hiding behind your publicist and legal team? That was it, the final straw. Brad took a step toward the desk, his entire body radiating fury. You want accountability? Here's some accountability. You're a failed political correspondent who couldn't cut it in real journalism, so you ended up on a morning show ambushing actors to feel relevant again. The personal attack landed hard. George's carefully constructed composure cracked visibly. Excuse me? You heard me. Brad was in full attack mode now, all pretense of Hollywood politeness abandoned. You sit here every morning pretending to be some kind of hard-hitting journalist, but what you really are is a morning television host desperate to recapture whatever credibility you think you once had. George stood up fully now, his face flushed with anger. I've interviewed every president for the last 2 decades. I've covered wars, elections, constitutional crises. Don't you dare question my credentials. Then act like it, Brad shot back. Stop behaving like a tabloid reporter who got lucky and ended up with a network contract. You want to be a serious journalist? Then ask serious questions about serious topics. Don't hide behind the pretense of journalism while you're really just feeding the gossip machine. The studio audience was completely silent, transfixed by this unprecedented breakdown of normal television protocol. Camera operators continued filming, but several were visibly uncomfortable with what they were capturing. This had gone far beyond entertainment into something darker, more personal. You think because you've memorized a few lines and look good on camera that you understand how the real world works? George's voice was rising now, his own composure finally beginning to crack. You live in a bubble of yes-men and sycophants. You have no idea what real accountability looks like. Real accountability? Brad's laugh was harsh. You want to talk about real accountability? Let's talk about yours. How many careers have you damaged with your ambush interviews? How many people have you hurt in your quest to prove you're still relevant? When was the last time you looked in the mirror and asked yourself whether you've become everything you once claimed to stand against? The personal attacks were flying now, each man trying to wound the other as deeply as possible. The veneer of professional television had completely disintegrated, replaced by raw, ugly human conflict. George's response was vicious. At least I'm not running from my responsibilities. At least I'm not hiding behind a movie star image while my family falls apart around me. Brad moved closer to the desk, close enough that security was starting to look nervous. You know what your problem is, George? You've spent so long pretending to be the smartest guy in the room that you've forgotten how to be a decent human being. You've confused cruelty with intelligence, aggression with insight, and you've confused fame with wisdom? George fired back. You think because millions of people buy tickets to see you pretend to be other people, that somehow makes your opinions matter? It doesn't. It makes you an entertainer, nothing more. The insults were cutting deeper now, each man finding exactly the words that would hurt the other most. Brad, attacking George's professional credibility and suggesting he had lost his way as a journalist. George, diminishing Brad's intelligence and reducing him to nothing more than a pretty face who entertained people for money. You know what? Brad's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet again. This interview is over. I'm done being your entertainment for the morning. You don't get to decide when this interview is over? George replied coldly. You agreed to be here. You signed the contracts. You don't get to run away just because you don't like the questions. Watch me. Brad started to walk toward the edge of the set, but George's next words stopped him cold. That's right. Just walk away. Just like you walked away from your marriage, your responsibilities, your children when things got difficult. Brad spun around, his face a mask of pure rage. You just made the biggest mistake of your career, George. The threat was clear, and suddenly security was moving. Two large men in suits started approaching the set from different angles, ready to intervene if the situation escalated to physical confrontation. George seemed to realize he had pushed too far, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Is that a threat, Brad? Are you threatening me on live television? It's a promise, Brad said quietly. A promise that you just ended your own career with that last comment? You think you know about accountability? Wait until your network executives review this footage. Wait until the advertisers start pulling out. Wait until social media gets hold of this. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in around the studio. This wasn't just a heated interview anymore. This was a career-ending disaster for someone, possibly both of them. George's voice was shaky now. You can't intimidate me with threats about my job. I don't need to intimidate you, Brad replied, his composure returning as George's crumbled. You just did this to yourself. Every word of this is being recorded. Every second is being broadcast live. You attacked my children, my family, my character, all in the name of morning television entertainment. How do you think that's going to play? The stage manager finally approached, clearly having received urgent instructions from the control room. Gentlemen, we need to go to commercial. No, George said firmly. We're finishing this interview. The interview is finished, Brad replied. He looked directly into the main camera, addressing the audience for the first time since the confrontation began. Ladies and gentlemen, I came here this morning to talk about a film I'm proud of, a story about redemption and growth. Instead, I was subjected to a personal attack disguised as journalism. This is not what morning television should be. This is not what journalism should be. And this is not what I signed up for. He unclipped his remaining microphone and dropped it on the floor. George, I hope this was worth it. I hope destroying whatever credibility you had left was worth the ratings boost you think you're going to get. As Brad walked off the set, George called after him. Don't you dare walk away from me. We're not finished here. Brad paused at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. "Yes, George, we are finished. Completely finished." The cameras continued rolling as security escorted Brad toward the exit. George standing alone behind the desk, his career in ruins, the studio in stunned silence. And that's how one of Hollywood's biggest stars got kicked off Good Morning America after the most explosive interview in morning television history. The fallout from this confrontation would be talked about for years, but that's a story for another day. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories and comment below. What do you think was the moment George went too far?